Welcome to the Kapital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is October 30th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. Well, the Fed does it again. They cut interest rates by 25 basis points. No surprise to us here. That is going to be the main topic for today's podcast. But before we get into that, let's congratulate the Washington Nationals for winning the World Series in Game 7, beating the Houston Astros in Houston by a score of 6-2. This is the first World Series championship in franchise history. So kudos to the Washington Nationals. Perhaps, maybe, just maybe, fingers crossed, this is a sign that maybe the politicians in Washington, D.C. can get things done for the American people. Don't hold your breath on it. That's why I said cross your fingers. Time will tell, but congratulations to them. We're going to talk about some of the other economic numbers that are coming out of China, some numbers that are coming out of Australia and Japan as well. But first to the market news. The S&P gained 10 points. The Dow was up 115. The NASDAQ closed up 27 points. The Russell, the 2000, the small cap index, closed down 4 points for the day. The Dow Jones Transports gave back 1.8%, and the New York Stock Exchange was up 0.3%. Now, these markets whipsawed, especially the S&P, Dow, and NASDAQ. The Russell 2000 was pretty much down all day, although it did try to rally at the end of the day, as did the other major indexes, but they were able to gain positive territory. This is sort of par for the course when the Federal Reserve makes their announcement. The markets are volatile. They go back and forth. Yesterday was a slow day because everybody's on pins and needles. What's Jay Powell going to do? Again, further evidence that we state here all the time that we do not live in a country or in a world that is adhering to free market capitalistic principles. When the world awaits the words and actions of a handful of individuals and institutions, this is the definition of centralization. So this is the definition of a command and control economy. I don't know how many times we have to say it, but I'm going to gladly say it every day here until it isn't so, and that day isn't going to come soon enough. It's probably going to take some sort of revolution in this country to get that done. But I digress. We have oil relatively unchanged from yesterday's podcast, but just to recap, WTI is at $55.25 per barrel, and Brent is at $60.90 per barrel. Gold and silver both up slightly today. Gold is now trading at $1,500 an ounce, and silver gained a few pennies from yesterday's podcast, trading at $17.88. The U.S. 10-year Treasury down slightly, is now yielding 1.8%. And the VIX, the volatility index, it sold off at the end of the day as well. It lost 6.5% and is now trading at $12.33. Be mindful of the volatility index, ladies and gentlemen, especially on the back of our volatility model. It is quite possible that there could be some type of repeat of the fourth quarter of last year. Of course, when I say that, I just mean the volatility. It could be to the upside in another melt-up, or it could be an actual repeat of last year altogether, where stocks lose 15 to 20% in a month and a half. That's what the volatility model is indicating. The fact that the VIX is trading at $12.33 to me says something isn't quite right here. Typically, when you have the VIX at these low levels, especially for a sustained period of time, it gets a little hairy. And markets tend to surprise. And in this instance, it'll be to the downside to get the VIX back up ever so slightly or dramatically. Time will tell. Boeing, just to follow up with Boeing, they are down 0.8% as CEO Dennis Muilenburg continued his testimony, but this time today before a House panel, pretty much taking the same types of questions and obviously giving the same types of answers, but that's par for the course. When you are testifying before Congress, you're typically going before committees on the House and in the Senate, so you're going to have the same types of questions, but you're giving both chambers of Congress the ability to question the witnesses. So, and that's right, and that's the way it should be, but nothing really bombshell-esque, if you will, from Boeing today. On the global economic front, we have some Chinese data out. The official NBS manufacturing PMI in China unexpectedly fell. Again, there's that word unexpectedly. unexpectedly fell to 49.3 in October from 49.8 in September. Recall, anything below 50 is in contraction. Missing market estimates of 49.8. This was the sixth straight month of contraction in factory activity amid ongoing trade tension with the United States and sluggish domestic demand. Overseas sales declined for the 17th straight month and the steepest in 3 months. New orders, new orders fell again, and employment continued to drop. So not looking good for Chinese manufacturing. Chinese services growth slows to an over 3.5-year low. The official NBS non-manufacturing PMI in China unexpectedly dropped to 52.8 in October from 53.7 in the prior month. 52.8, we are above 50, indicating expansion. However, this is at a lower rate. The Federal Reserve was not the only central bank in town to cut rates today. Hong Kong cuts their base interest rate by 25 basis points, and it is now yielding 2%. Brazil also cuts their interest rate by 50 basis points and is now yielding 5%. However, the Bank of Japan did hold rates. They did hold rates, but it is at a negative 0.1%. Okay? And then we have Japanese industrial production. It rebounded in September. Industrial production in Japan was up by 1.4% month over month in September of 2019 after a decline of 1.1%. And the markets were anticipating an increase of 0.4%. So quite the beat out of Japan on a month-over-month basis. And the land down under, Australian building permits rebound more than estimated. So there's some mixed data going on around here. And, of course, across the pond, we have the UK consumer confidence dipping to a low we haven't seen in a little while. So a mixed bag here. And then, obviously, here on the domestic front, we had U.S. GDP figure come out. The preliminary number came out at 1.9%. The markets were anticipating 1.6, so slightly above market expectations. However, this is on the back of the U.S. consumer and Uncle Sam and other state and local government spending. So we have business investment spending virtually in contraction, and we have net exports not serving us well either, which is typically par for the course. And if you caught our recent presentation of capital economics on our website, thecapitalnews.com, or on our YouTube channel, The Capital News, we went through an analysis and a presentation on GDP, and we also went through an analysis on government revenues, deficits, and debt. And of course, none of it is looking good. But that's no surprise to us here. This is what we have been predicting. This is what we have been witnessing for quite some time. This is not the greatest economy in the world. However, President Trump did take to Twitter, of course, to make that exact statement following the report of 1.9%, saying that this is the greatest economy ever. Now, if you go back in history, because records are kept, and if you go to Donald Trump's Twitter feed, and if you look all the way back to 2012, Donald Trump made the same comment. Well, let me step back. We had the same GDP. We had 1.9% back in 2012, and Donald Trump tweeted then, "This economy is in a lot of trouble." So today, GDP is 1.9%. It's the greatest economy ever. 2012, GDP was 1.9%, the same. The economy's in big trouble. So which is it? Again, talking out of both sides of his mouth. This is par for the course, unfortunately. And this is just a continuation of this confidence game. We don't need the confidence. We need the truth. That's what we need. And then we can start to build the confidence. And we can start to build the trust and credibility that an economy really needs to succeed, and not to be artificially kept on life support by the Federal Reserve and deficit spending. Because coincidentally, maybe not coincidentally, we once again find ourselves in a near $1 trillion deficit, $984 billion. Of course, on a year-over-year basis of the increase in national debt, it's actually $1.4 trillion. But, who's counting? And that's just fuzzy government accounting for you as to why it is quoted at $984 billion. But that goes back to 2012, because this year's budget deficit was the largest it has been since 2012, which again, same GDP level, 1.9%, 1.9%. So we'll see what happens. And it's quite frightening and worrisome to me, because we're throwing everything and the kitchen sink at the markets, at the economy, and we are below 2%. Now, that's the preliminary number, 1.9%. I anticipate that it'll probably go lower as we make our way through. Of course, maybe it'll surprise to the upside. At least it'll be a surprise to me if it reads more than 2% when that revision comes out, probably in a couple of months. But we'll keep you posted on that. And again, recall the Cass Freight Index report, again, reiterating their stance, given the deterioration that exists within the transport sector across all modes, freight, rail, air, by sea, everything, negative GDP by the end of this year. So we didn't get a negative print out of the Q3. I did not think that we would. I really did not think that we would. I thought there was still enough juice in the system to keep this thing positive. And then next quarter, that's going to be anybody's guess. So it could be negative. Again, we have a couple of the district banks of the Federal Reserve saying that, look, we're continuing to lower our forecast for GDP growth for the fourth quarter, and we have a couple of those banks below 1%. Around 9.9%, 0.96%. Now, you're close, but you're still south of 1%. That is nowhere near being close to the greatest economy ever. It's not even close. You can't even be taken seriously if you make that statement. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. We're not obviously going to get the fourth quarter number until the end of January of 2020. So we still got a lot of ways to go, and anything could happen in between there. And there's going to be a lot of noise in between there. You can bet on that. Another geopolitical event today, and we were just talking about this yesterday in regards to these global protests, but this one specifically with Chile, the government came out and they are canceling the economic summit that was expected to take place within a few weeks. This is the exact same summit where President Xi of China and President Trump were expected to meet to sign either a partial Phase 1 deal or the entirety of Phase 1. Now, we don't obviously have a lot of specifics. We're never given a lot of specifics. All we're ever told is this is going to be great. It's fantastic. It's ahead of schedule. We were told that a couple of days ago. That is so Thunder Thumbs could tweet out that the S&P 500 made an all-time high. And then the next day, that was on Monday, and then Tuesday comes around, and you have White House officials saying, not really ahead of schedule. In fact, we're not even sure if the documents are going to be ready to sign for this meeting in Chile. Now they don't have to worry about it because there's not going to be a meeting in Chile. Now, they could reschedule this, or it could be on the same day, but just in another city. I do believe there were reports out from China saying, yeah, come over here, come to Macau, which is basically, China's Las Vegas over there, the resort and hotel and casino city over there in China. So we'll see if those countries want to keep the scheduled meeting but just have it in Macau, or if it will be somewhere else. It'll be interesting to see the politics of it. If Donald Trump has to fly all the way to China to sign a trade deal with China, don't think that there wasn't some Machiavellian calculation there by the Chinese on that. And it'll be interesting to see if it's somewhere else if President Xi goes. So time will tell. We don't have a lot of details. I wish I could give you details with the deal. Quite honestly, I would rather not be able to. And I stated this in my letter to the president. Just keep it to yourself. Shut your mouth. Have your team shut their mouths. Keep the conversations going if there's progress. And if there isn't, there isn't. Now, of course, given some other news that has come to light with these imprisonments, these concentration camps, whatever you want to call them, these human rights violations, you can't even deal with them. Not that I ever said you could trust the Chinese anyway, but now, given these human rights violations, I don't even know how we can do business with them, in all honesty, and I don't think that we should. But I don't think Donald Trump is going to walk away from this. He could, but then he would suffer greatly in the stock market, and I just don't think he wants to give up that gem right now, especially not when we're going to really be speeding things up when it comes to the 2020 presidential campaign. But I guess time will tell. I mean, maybe Donald Trump will find a moral compass here. It'll point true north, and maybe he'll say we're walking away, and that's it. And he can explain to the American people why he's doing it, why China does what why they're doing what they're doing. It's you can't really explain it other than that it's an evil act that shouldn't be taking place. You've also had some pushback from China recently because there are other countries that are starting to team up and point the finger at China and say, look, you can't do this. You got to stop this. And they're saying this is going to have an effect on these trade talks. I told you, folks, nothing is in a vacuum. Everything is interconnected in one way or another, whether it's the Hong Kong protests, whether it's these human rights violations, whether it's the NBA story, whether it's a whole host of things. Nothing is done in isolation. And then you also have Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin coming out and making comments and saying, well, still on progress here for phase one. However, it's probably going to take some time for China to ramp up for those agricultural purchases. What? Are you kidding me? I thought this was the greatest deal ever. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, we were told by Thunder Thumbs that this was pretty much done. It was just signing. We just got to sign it and it's done. Boom. Nothing to see here. Best thing ever. Of course, that wasn't the case. Immediately, that was not the case, and nothing has, come to pass since, except a further widening of the gap between U.S. and China. You had the bad cop speech by Vice President Pence, and you have Donald Trump that he's either trying to play good cop or he's just trying to manipulate the markets to get them to all-time highs, or a combination thereof, because there's no specifics. Even when he was asked one time about specifics, he said, well, I'd rather not talk about it. That's because there's nothing there, folks. So why is it going to take a while for China to ramp up? One, first, they can't be trusted. And secondly, because China is doing exactly what we said they would be doing, because they have 1.4 billion mouths to feed. And like I said yesterday, and like I did in the write-up of yesterday's podcast, revolutions are fought on empty stomachs. They got enough problems economically. We're reading off the data. And believe me, it's probably worse than that. They don't want a riot. They don't want protests. They don't want a revolution in their country. They got mouths to feed, okay? So it was a good thing. The United States is an agricultural powerhouse. It got 1.4 billion people that need fed. Let's do business. Now you have all of this ruckus. You have a surge. I saw this on Bloomberg today, a surge of 24% in bankruptcies amongst farmers. A surge of 24% in farmer bankruptcies. That's not winning. And this is in spite of the fact that we are bailing out the farmers with taxpayer money. Of course, Donald Trump says that China's paying for it with the tariffs, but that's not how they work. We've been down that story a million times. So that's not good, folks. That's just simply not good at all. But getting back to my point with why it's going to take a while for China to ramp up, because they have all those people to feed. You can't sit here and wait for some sort of trade war deal to get done, some sort of trade deal to be complete, especially at the rate at which they're going. So exactly what we said, they were going to start sourcing other supply. And just by chance, I had no idea that it was going to be these two countries, but if you go back, it's on the record. The two countries that I used as an example as to where China may go was Russia and Brazil, and that's exactly where they're going. They're going there for wheat, they're going there for soybeans, and I'm sure they're going there for some other items as well. And like I said, President Putin of Russia and President Bolsonaro of Brazil, they're not just going to throw their hands up and say, oh, yeah, well, okay, it was good while it lasted for a couple years, for a few months. Now you can just go back and start buying from the United States. They're not just going to sit on their hands, and they might have a case to take to the World Trade Organization. So this thing is far from over, and nobody's going to tell you this except me, because Donald Trump gives you no specifics. Vice President Pence is playing bad cop. Mnuchin's a yes man. Peter Navarro's an idiot who needs fired. And you rarely ever hear from Robert Lighthizer, and Wilbur Ross he's always napping. So you're not going to get this from anybody. So that's why you got to stay tuned to the Kapital News. That's all I can tell you. So that's not good. So that's the trade war. We'll see what happens if that thing proceeds with, again, at another meeting in Macau or some other site. Now to the Federal Reserve, our good old buddies at the Federal Reserve. They cut interest rates by 25 basis points. They are anticipating that they are going to keep on with non-QE, at least until the second quarter of next year at a pace of $60 billion per month. We knew this, but that's at least how long it will last until the second quarter of next year. We anticipate it'll probably last longer than that, and they may even up it, especially if there is further deterioration in the economic news, which we are anticipating because we have a ton of leading economic indicators that we follow here at the Kapital News, and we will be doing more presentations on those. And it's just a continuation of a downward trajectory. We are far from over. We now have Mexico in a technical recession, and we have concerns that Canada is going to be entering a recession in the near future as well. Exactly what we have been predicting here for quite a while. Now, if you have some of your two largest trading partners for the United States, Mexico and Canada, in recession, how do you think that's going to bode for the United States? Not too well, folks. Even if you sign in complete USMCA, NAFTA 2.0, basically, all that's going to do is maybe encourage some animal spirits and give some confidence to the markets, but that's all it's going to do. You can't just sign a piece of paper and overnight, boom, you're booming. That's not how it works. Same thing with Federal Reserve policy, whether they're increasing interest rates or lowering them. It doesn't happen overnight. The effects take time to make their way through an economy. This is a $20 trillion economy. This is a big beast, okay? It takes time to make its way through the system. And what we do in this country, because we are so powerful and because we are the world's largest economy, our decisions affect the rest of the world. And that's in large part why you have some of these weaker economic nations, if you will, protesting all over the world. And this is going to continue. And like I wrote in my podcast write-up yesterday, that this is not transitory. This is history in the making. You understand me? This is not transitory. This is history in the making. All of these protests, these government ousters, prime ministers, presidents, parliaments, we are just getting started. The weakest links are always going to break and crack first. That's what we're seeing right now around the world. It's just a matter of time before it starts to hit the more developed nations. This is far from over. And the reason I bring up trade in the midst of all of this is because trade and trade uncertainty was one of the main reasons that Jay Powell, a couple of months ago, justified cutting interest rates. I think that was all the way back in July, at the end of July. They're saying, look, we're going to do this insurance cut. We're going to do this mid-cycle adjustment because, well, quite frankly, he didn't say this, I'm paraphrasing, we're going to shoot from the hip. We've never done this before, which is true, which is basically what he admitted. We've never done this before in regards to trade. We have no idea how monetary policy is going to adjust or affect trade. We've never done it before. So fantastic. They're shooting from the hip in the midst of an economic experiment that they've never pulled off before with quantitative easing and zero interest rates and negative interest rates, depending on where you are. Yeah, let's do another thing and shoot from the hip. Well, we got uncertainty with trade. Let's do it. And that was, again, mid-cycle adjustment, anticipation that was just going to be cutting interest rates one time, and then we'll see what happens. Of course, we said that's a bunch of baloney, a bunch of BS. They're going to continue cutting. And 3 out of the last 4 months, because they did not have a meeting in August, they have cut interest rates. So no surprise. What we are told today, however, by Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, during his press conference, where he obviously fielded questions from the media, they were trying to pin him down. Are you going to cut interest rates again or aren't you? He said, well, we're kind of done for right now. We're going to wait and see. However, it's not so much data dependent from a whole host of things. It's not so much focused on trade anymore. The big kicker right now, it's inflation. That's the big number that they're going to look at. That's the big one. And if they never get back up to 2%, and remember, asymmetric inflation, asymmetric around 2%. You're below 2% for a little while, that's okay. So now asymmetric, or symmetrical, I should say, symmetrical inflation above 2% for a little bit, that's okay too. This makes no sense. This is not in any type of economic textbook that would make sense. They're just pulling numbers out of the you-know-where to make it up, and they're saying, yeah, that's good. That 2% sounds good. And because we were below it, now we can be symmetrical and we can be above it for a little while too. So unless and until inflation gets back up to 2%, and it's going to have to sustain itself at 2%, if not above 2% for a while, they're not going to be increasing interest rates. Okay? They are not going to be increasing interest rates. Will they cut them? That's the question. That, again, will be predicated on inflation. If inflation stays too low, then they might get back in to try to juice it to try to get inflation back up. Now, that has not worked out well for Japan. They have negative rates. It has not worked out well for Europe. They have negative rates. So I don't know why Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve think it's going to work here in the United States. It most likely will not, but they're going to try. The other thing that I'm sort of keeping in the back of my mind, and I'm going to share it with you, is the fact that we are in the midst of the 2020 presidential campaign. And I don't think that the Federal Reserve is going to want to look highly political come next year. So if they're going to cut interest rates, they're going to do it very early on next year, probably within the first quarter, maybe in the first month or two of the second quarter, and then they're going to be hands off, unless you know what really hits the fan and they got to put the pedal to the metal. But there's other things that they could do. They could up the non-QE quantitative easing purchases of Treasury bills, and they could go back out to buying notes or whatever. They could do a number of things there, but they'll continue to cut interest rates. But the lower they go, the less ammunition they are going to have to fight the next recession, and we are going to have one because recessions are not outlawed, and it's a natural process, and it's a good thing for the system. It cleanses the system, but nobody wants to deal with the pain, and nobody wants to take responsibility because there's no leadership from the White House to the Republicans to the Democrats, to the Federal Reserve, and to everybody else. Nobody wants to take responsibility for anything. It's a true shame, but that is why this country is in the shape that it's in. There's no leadership. There's no truth. We don't know what's going on in the Federal Reserve in this overnight rate. We have no idea what's going on with the USChina Trade talks. We have no idea the entire story with the impeachment inquiry. We have no idea with if there's a deep state investigation going on behind the scenes with AG Barr in Durham. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but just this is what's going on in this country. This is why everything is in shambles. And it's just a matter of time before those protests that are taking place globally are going to take place here in the United States as well. And I take no pride or pleasure in saying that, but that's what's going to happen because there's no leadership and there's no truth, and everybody is up to debt in their eyeballs, and it's only getting worse. So we got to pay attention to everything that's taking place. You have to understand how everything is interconnected. Now, not one person on this planet understands all of the intricacies of all of this interconnectedness, but you at least have to understand and appreciate that everything is interconnected in one way or another to some degree. So always keep that in your mind. Nothing is just happens out of the blue and is just a one-off, or it's just going to affect one thing. It does have ripple effects of varying degrees, obviously, but it does happen. So be mindful of that. So I thought Jay Powell's press conference and his statement was a poor display. I really do. I believe the Federal Reserve is hiring a speechwriter of some sort. I don't know how good this person's going to be. Probably not good at all because they're going to be told what to say anyway. Jay Powell knows what he has to say when he goes out there. He's just not very good at doing it, unfortunately. I think the guy is having maybe a crisis of conscience, quite honestly, because I don't think that Jay Powell is a scumbag. Janet Yellen, she's a scumbag. Ben Bernanke, he was a scumbag. Alan Greenspan, to a degree, is a scumbag. I mean, that's where a lot of this started, okay? Those people were sleazebags. Jay Powell, I'm kind of holding out hope for this guy. Not that I'm saying I like him, but I don't. But compared to the other three stooges that I just mentioned, Jay Powell is, I think, the better of them because he was trying to normalize the balance sheet. Of course, he failed miserably because Donald Trump started picking on him. The markets threw a huge hissy fit last year, and he had to be reminded, I guess, who he works for. So we're going to see what happens. But I think, again, be mindful of what the Fed does next year and when they might stop cutting rates because Donald Trump is not going to be happy about it. He's going to continue to blame the Federal Reserve, saying, look, we should be in negative interest rate territory. Again, that is detrimental to the financial system, and it'll be detrimental to people who are trying to save. If you have money in the bank is going to take your money. They're going to take it. Instead of giving you interest, they're going to take it. If you think you're being defensive because maybe you don't want to be in the stock market because you're afraid of the volatility, or maybe you've made enough profits and you're happy with what you got, and you want to go into the bond market, well, if we have negative interest bearing bonds and notes and bills in this country, you're not going to earn interest. You're going to pay Uncle Sam. Is that what you want? Do you understand that that's what negative interest rates means? Because Donald Trump doesn't tell you that. He just says, well, that's what they're doing in Japan and Europe. Well, I thought we weren't supposed to be socialist countries. So why are we taking the lead from a bunch of socialists out of Europe? I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever, but you're never going to get these answers from Donald Trump. He never explains them. That's why he talks. That's why he tweets them. That's why he's thunder thumbs, because he doesn't have to answer anybody. He just throws it out there. People can argue amongst themselves on his Twitter feed. I'm most definitely in that camp from time to time when he just says something so outrageous or something that just gets me so infuriated where I feel compelled to respond to him. Of course, he doesn't give a damn, but, I have to do it. So time will tell, but that's going to be the politics of it, because for all intents and purposes, at this juncture, the Federal Reserve has done what Donald Trump has wanted. So there goes their independence, and they take their calls from Wall Street too, who wanted lower interest rates. So Donald Trump's been calling for lower interest rates. He's getting them. He's been calling for quantitative easing. He's got it, even though we're not supposed to call it quantitative easing. The only thing he's going to complain and whine about now is that they're not even lower and that they're not in negative interest rate territory, which, again, is detrimental to this system and to your pocketbook. I'm the only one that's going to tell you this, and a handful of other people, obviously, but nobody in Washington is going to tell you this. The president's not going to tell you this. Jay Powell's not going to tell you this. Larry Kudlow and the idiot Peter Navarro aren't going to tell you this. I am. So I'm doing my best to look out for you guys. And like I always say, stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out, leave your comments. We do love hearing from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.